Hey guys, welcome back to Thrive Fitness in Ann Arbor.
Today we're going to teach you all about your glutes and hamstrings. More specifically, hip thrusts and many hip thrust variations. Your glutes are your center of gravity, while being the prime mover and a major focal point of hip thrusts. Your hamstrings and lumbar or lower back muscles work synergistically to help your glutes power through hip thrusts.
There are three key muscle groups that make up your glutes. Your gluteus maximus being the largest and main muscle group, along with your gluteus minimus and gluteus medius.
The functions of the glute muscles include extension, abduction, external rotation, and internal rotation of the hip joint, along with hip stabilization and power.
Your glutes are the largest muscle in the body and extremely powerful as they keep your core and posture strong.
Did you know that your hamstrings involve three primary muscle groups? The biceps femoris, the semitendinosus, and the semimembranosus. The hamstrings are in charge of flexion of the knee joint and also extend the thigh to the back side of the body. Your hamstrings are primarily used for walking, running, and many other physical activities.
If you sit behind a desk for most of the day and tend to have tight hips and hamstrings, then the exercises we're going to show you for your glutes and hamstrings will really strengthen your posture and core while helping to stabilize your core and center of gravity.
Be sure to watch our video on stretching first to learn how to have optimal mobility in your hip complex before you start hip thrusting or training your glutes and hamstrings to get the most activation and results out of your workout. Glute and hamstring exercises with tight hips can lead to unwanted lower back, hip flexor, and knee pain. We're going to show you a few barbell hip thrust variations, but first we're going to start with the main one. All you're going to need is a barbell with some weights on it, preferably if you can, a pad on top of the bar, and a step or a riser with a mat on it for comfort. If you're not ready to add plates or weight on the bar yet, this is not the exercise to start with. We're going to show you more variations that you can start with so you can build your way up and progress to the barbell hip thrust. Alright, we're going to set the bar pad on the hip flexors, hands steering the bar away from your hips as the bar comes up. Set your feet shoulder width apart into a jump stance, and as you lean back on your shoulder blades, you're going to drive the weight up with your heels and squeeze your butt, hamstrings, and if you come high enough, you'll feel it in your lower back as well. Try to really engage your hamstrings and glutes by squeezing at the top and pausing and really feeling the contraction, and going down slow and controlled so you don't lose control of the bar as you go down and slam the bar on the ground. Many people are athletes who struggle with weak inner thighs or notice their knees pinch in or roll in during squats, lunges, or certain movements like a deadlift. Sumo hip thrusts are a great way to build your inner thigh VMO strength and your outer glute strength to avoid ever having that problem ever again. So we're going to start this sumo hip thrust the same way as before, setting your feet up shoulder width apart, leaning back, and then after you come up, I'm going to have Alexis turn her toes and knees out 45 degrees. So you don't need to spread your feet any wider, but we're trying to focus on pointing the toes and knees out 45 degrees out the whole time with your knees following your toes, but also staying over your ankles the whole time. And this is going to target, like I said, the VMOs, inner thighs more, and the outer glutes more to kill that imbalance where your knees roll in or pinch in during certain exercises, especially for athletes who run a lot that develop common imbalances like really tight, overused IT bands and really weak inner thighs. The next barbell hip thrust variation we're going to show you is designed to strengthen those of you who have weaker IT bands and outer glutes and outer hamstrings. So we're going to get your feet just a little bit of a narrower stance with a small resistance band around your knees this time. So as you hip thrust up, we're going to push the knees out, really focus on the outer thighs. As you come down, really focusing on making sure the knees don't pinch in and keeping tension on the band with the knees pushing out the whole time. And lastly, again, for those of you who struggle with knees pinching and rolling in, or weaker inner thighs, and are not ready for the sumo hip thrusts yet, we're going to set a ball between your knees, nothing super heavy, but just enough where you can squeeze your knees around the ball as hard as you can to keep tension on the inner thighs and VMOs the entire time you're hip thrusting. awesome variation, and you'll really feel the burn in your inner thighs as you squeeze the ball the whole time without really loosening up on the inner thighs. Before we move on, I want to make sure we go over some common mistakes for the hip thrust so that you can do these correctly. First, always make sure your head alignment is perfectly neutral with your body. Try not to lean your head back or tuck your chin in too much. Always keep your shoulder blades on the edge of the step. We don't want to put too much pressure on your spine, so try to get your scapula on the step so it's not putting too much pressure on the spine as you lower and come up. Next, we always want to make sure your abs are squeezed tight, and then as you come up with the hip thrust, making sure you're not arching your lower back. So as Alexis comes up, the start of the movement starts with the hips, and we don't want to come up too high so we're hyperextending or arching your lower back. So squeeze your butt, squeeze your hamstrings without arching the lower back and coming up too high. Another couple common mistakes are the feet being too close to the body. So when Alexis comes up, her knees go forward past her ankles. That's a bad way to do hip thrusts and an easy way to hurt your knees. And next, having the feet too far out, which can kill the range of motion a little bit and overwork the hamstrings and really not put a lot of emphasis on the glutes. So when you do hip thrusts, you always want to make sure your knees line up directly over your ankles at the top of the movement. So she starts at about a 45-degree angle on the way down, and at the top of the movement, the knees line up over the ankles. Always try to use a mirror on these to make sure your foot position isn't all over the place. Make sure the feet are parallel and even, whether you're doing a sumo or regular stance, and always make sure they're following each other so they're not uneven. Now we're going to show you some of our favorite hip thrust variations, and a lot of these are more basic and they're progressive, so you can always build your way up to the barbell hip thrust by using a lot of these movements while still really working your hamstrings and glutes and lower back. Check it out. First, we're going to start with a double leg hip thrust with your feet on the ground. Try to keep most of the weight on your heels, and as you squeeze your butt up off the ground and pause, really squeeze at the top with your hamstrings, glutes, and lower back. If you come high enough, drop your hips down just off the ground and then right back up. Remember, don't arch your back, and if your lower back hurts on these, don't come up too high. Next, we're going to do a single leg hip thrust on the ground. Try to place your foot 45 degrees out from your body. Keep one leg floating in the air. Don't let that free leg move, and focus on the one side that's hip thrusting. All the way down on the floor, then right back up and squeeze your butt. So only one leg's working at a time. The free leg isn't moving. This version's a little more challenging than the double leg hip thrust. Highly recommend trying it out after you progress from the double leg hip thrust. Next, we're going to take your hip thrust a step further by elevating your feet onto the step. Remember, you can always add the band around your knees or the ball in between your knees to really emphasize strengthening your inner thighs and outer thighs a little bit more as you hip thrust. One step farther again, we're going to do a single leg hip thrust with your leg elevated so you get a little bit more range of motion at the top. Another hip thrust variation with your shoulders leaning back on the step again. And you can do these with or without weight as you progress. Double leg hip thrust with both feet on the ground without a barbell, using a lighter weight so you can build your way up to the barbell hip thrust. Once you progress from this movement, you can always do a single leg hip thrust with the shoulders on the step. This variation is a little more difficult as it really targets your glute and hamstring on one side. Remember, unilateral training is a great way to kill muscular imbalances so you don't overuse one side versus the other. Next, we're going to show you a frog thruster. For this exercise, you're going to put the bottoms of your feet together with your knees pointing out as close to your hips as you can. And then you're going to squeeze your butt up from this position while pushing the knees out. Remember, the angle of the knees pointing out is really going to target your inner thighs, inner hamstrings, and the outer glutes just a little bit more. Some other pieces of equipment you can use to take your hip thrusts to the next level are Bosu balls or stability balls to increase the stability effect. So you can try single leg hip thrust on the Bosu ball on either side, or you can try double leg hip thrust on the Bosu ball as well. Remember, you can add your bands in or your ball in between your knees to enhance the effects. With the stability bar here, you have some more amazing hip thrust options, starting with a regular hip thrust with both feet on the ball to enhance the stability. If your stability is awesome and you want to take it one step further, you can do a single leg hip thrust on the ball. Much more challenging, so you really got to squeeze your core and keep your hands on the ground for balance so you can come straight up and down. Next, you can do a double leg hamstring curl with the stability ball. So this time we're holding the hip thrust to glute contraction the whole time as we engage the hamstrings by pulling the ball in and releasing the ball slowly on the way down. If you want to take this one step further, you can do a single leg hamstring curl again. Much more difficult, but it's a great progression. While banded hip thrusts are not the most ideal way to build strength or power, they're an amazing exercise for glute activation before you start your strength training regimen. Right before. So we want to tie the band around a squat rack or a pole that's stable, tie the band around your hip flexors, and walk out so there's a little bit of tension pulling you back. Hamstring mobility is all about how well you can hip hinge. So it's not how well I can bend forward at the waist, it's about how well I can start my position here with my hips and push them as far back as I can so I feel a hinge in my hips going back, a stretch in my hamstrings, and as I come up I want to squeeze my butt forward. So don't just bend forward at the waist, hinge your hips back as far as they go with your feet shoulder width apart in that same jump stance. And as you come up, drive your glutes forward. The more explosive you drive your glutes forward, the better, so you can activate your glutes for more and more heavy weights as you progress into your strength training program. Another awesome glute activation drill is a cable hip thrust, where you can adjust the weights up or down for the best results for you. Remember, we're just trying to activate the glutes here, so really push your hips back and hinge them back as far as you can behind you on the way down so you feel a big stretch in your hamstrings. And then as you come up, really drive your glutes forward, keeping the weight on your heels, but never hyperextending the back. We just want to keep the target on the hamstrings and the glutes. Kettlebell swings are another amazing exercise for your glutes and hamstrings, and it really involves that hinge motion we just showed you by slightly bending your knees, not too much, and sticking your butt out as far as you can without bending forward at the waist too much. So a slight bend in the knees, hinging the hips back till we feel a slight pull in the hamstrings, and we're swinging the kettlebell through the legs on the way up. We're thrusting the hips forward to drive the kettlebell weight up. So we're not using our lower back, we're not using our arms. Our arms are just a guide. Check it out. And you can mix in some fun variations like the single arm kettlebell swing or alternating single arm kettlebell swing. Next glute activation exercise we're going to show you is called the clamshell. We love to use the band on this drill to add some slight tension and resistance so you can really squeeze your glutes, outer glutes, and IT band at the top of the movement for best activation. Try to keep your feet and your hips at a 45-degree angle, feet together, keep your bottom leg on the ground, and just raise the top knee and squeeze at the top as you go down slowly, keeping the tension in the band the whole time. The next progression from the clamshell is a clamshell to a hip thrust. You can do this one with or without a band. As you do the clamshell, by lifting your top knee, you're also going to do a lateral hip thrust off the ground, squeezing your butt at the top and releasing down slowly. Next, we're going to do reverse leg lifts, a more basic exercise as well. And we're going to stretch your arms out in front of you, legs straight, lift your legs and arms off the ground slowly and squeeze your butt at the top. Try not to bend the knees too much unless you want to activate your hamstrings at the top. Then you can bend your knees at the top, release slowly, and right back up. And my personal favorite of the two reverse leg lifts are elevating your upper body and lowering your legs down at a bigger range of motion, lifting your legs straight up and squeezing your butt at the top. Down slow, squeeze your butt at the top. To enhance the range of motion, we're laying on a box or a step. Great thing about this movement, it takes your lower back out of the picture and really targets your glutes and hamstrings if you bend your knees at the top or put a weight between your feet. And lastly, an amazing piece of equipment, a GHD machine or glute hamstring extension machine is an amazing way to train your glutes, hamstrings, and even lower back. This first variation, we're going to show you the feet are shoulder width apart and keeping the neutral spine the whole time, head neutral, lowering down slowly. As you come up, we're squeezing the glutes at the top, but remember, we're never arching the back. The next variation we're going to show you on here is a glute hamstring flexion at the top. So we're going to start the movement the same, lowering down slowly, and then all the way up. Once you get to parallel with your shoulders, hips, and knees, then we pull by bending the hamstrings, pushing with the calves, and squeezing the glutes at the top. If you want to take your lower back out of this a little bit more, we're going to stop right here and just bend the knees on the way up. Make sure you don't swing and keep all the focus on your calves, hamstrings, glutes, and very little on the lower back. And the last variation, which is another great variation, sumo glute hamstring flexion at the top. Make sure your toes and knees are still shoulder width apart, but pointing out 45 degrees. So as we come up, our toes and knees point out as we pull up with our hamstrings, calves, and still squeezing the glutes at the top.
Thanks for watching our video on hip thrusts.
If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, don't forget to subscribe for more awesome exercise instructional videos and more motivational videos every week. Feel free to comment below on any requests that you have for us as well. Thanks for watching.
Bye guys.